We past went over an hour, so I'll keep it shorter. Welcome everyone to the final class for summer 2021. The title of this series of lectures is How to Speak Ancient Hebrew in Modern Israel. Glad to see returning customers. And this lecture I called There's No Place Like Home. We'll be mostly exploring modern Hebrew words for everyday household items. And of course, like Dad already noticed, it's kind of a play on words because I'm flying to Israel tomorrow. And before we get into the words, there's just an interesting thought about Israel that some of us call like our homeland, from a book that I read recently. You know, when you come to visit here from Israel, people sometimes tell you like, "Oh, welcome back," and then they have to add like, "I didn't say welcome home because I know Israel's home, right?" You know, and I'm like, "Oh, wow, that's great, very Zionistic of you." But an interesting thought: in other countries, it's common to refer to the country as like the motherland or the fatherland. But as Jews, we never refer to Israel that way. It's not like the motherland or the fatherland. But homeland is something that we say. And I think, or what I read, this book by this Israeli writer named Netanel Ellinson, he said, it's fitting because our claim is not that the land is our motherland, our fatherland. We're very open about the fact, and we emphasize in the Torah that our ancestors came from elsewhere. Right? Abraham came from Mesopotamia. Or if you want to say when we were born as a nation, it was in Egypt, when we left Egypt. It's not the land, whereas other nations, like the French, are people who were born out of the country of France. The country created us. It really is the motherland. It really is the fatherland. So too, India for Indians and China for Chinese. The United States perhaps is different in that way. But you could still say that as a nation, right, Americans were created in America. You come here and then you become American. But with Israel, it's very different. It's not the country that birthed us, but rather it's the home that we created as a nation. In this analogy, which is well rooted in the Tanakh and the writings of the prophets and our sages, when we came out of Egypt, we were born as a nation, and then we entered into a sort of marriage with God when we received the Torah. And in the home that we created together with God is the land of Israel. And eventually we were kicked out of it when we didn't uphold our side of the deal of the Torah. And now, of course, God is like inviting us back to once again, be a family in the home that we created long ago, and again make it our home. So just some thoughts I have about the word home and Israel. And what makes it unique and different from other nations in their homes. So without further ado, we'll get to the household items. So I mentioned I'm going to Israel tomorrow. So I had to, and now traveling is different than it always was, to get the COVID tests. And if you look on the source sheet, I have this picture. You might recognize this picture, like I'm not a robot. You have to click and like verify that you're not a robot before you can do something on like a website. And then they give you this little like game where you have to like check all the boxes with cars, with trucks, with bridges. So I did one yesterday to register for a COVID test at the airport in Israel. And so it's a Hebrew website. This little I'm not a robot check thing was in Hebrew. And I saw there a word that I never heard before. I never knew about, so I thought I'd share it with you. And the word is madhanim. It said, check all the boxes. It said in Hebrew, samen et kol kubiyotim madhanim. And I'm like, oh, I don't know what that is. But then I looked at the pictures and I saw that some of the squares had parking meters. And then I realized instantly, oh, I know what a madhan is. It makes sense. Because mad comes from limdod. Limdod is to measure. And han is short for lahanot, which is to park. We had it in lecture 1, right? To park your car is lahanot. So madhan is a parking meter. So I thought that was interesting, and it just goes to show how once you see how they do things, you can figure out words on the fly. Which is something that happens to me a lot, and it's kind of fun. So I included here some examples of words that have this prefix mad, mem dalet, and then something else, and it's equivalent to in English when you have the suffix meter. Like a thermometer measures your temperature, parking meter measures how long you were parking. That's so madhom, right? Hom is heat, so thermometer. Madhan we discussed, and mad lahasdam. I put the English. Does anyone know what that is?
No.
Blood pressure.
Exactly. The device that measures blood pressure. We usually call it like a blood pressure cuff. There's the cuff, and then there's the.
I've never seen that word.
That's the real word for the device that measures the pressure. Sphygmomanometer. But in Hebrew, it's easier to understand. Mad lahazdam. It measures the blood pressure.
The pressure of the blood.
Exactly. There are more like this. Whenever you have mad, it's usually some sort of measuring device. Since we're talking about flying, I just want to include the word for airplane, which a lot of us have learned in school, matos. But it's an interesting case in point because this word only appears once in the whole Tanakh. The pasuk is in Iyov, which is a perfect book for very obscure words. There's a lot of obscure words, and a lot of modern Hebrew words come from there. Iyov says, my days, they just ran from me. Like my life was fleeting. They ran away and I didn't see anything good in my days. Yes, my days just, were fleeting like boats and like a vulture that flies to the food, to its prey. So that word yatus, here in the pasuk it's with a sin. So I don't get confused because now in modern Hebrew they switched to a samech, but it's the same root for matos. Right? Yatus here is when the vulture flies, so matos is something that flies.
Nesher is a vulture.
Good question. Yes.
So eagle.
It's commonly translated as eagle, but it's actually mistranslation. It's a certain type of vulture called the griffin vulture, which is native to Israel. And now it's like on the verge of extinction, and there's a lot of efforts to try to rehabilitate the species. It's just in a few places in the north and
So what's an
whatever. An eagle, I don't know. But, it's in the Torah because it's an animal that's native to Israel. And it's a vulture, really.
So what is the root? It's Ted Vav is the root?
It's Ted Sin.
Ted Sin.
Mm-hmm. And so the Sin and Samach are interchangeable because they make the same sound. So Matos is something that is Tas, something that flies. And usually a bird would be described as, being af. La'uf is to fly. Right? And afot, therefore, are birds. But they felt like an airplane deserves a new word as a new phenomenon, not like, should we call it like a ma'of or something, because that sounds like a flying bird, a flying animal. So they invented this word. They wanted to find a rare word for flying that is not already used to be appropriate for a new invention. And that's where matos comes from. And, in general, kelei tais are air vessels, any type of flying thing. And you have words now in Hebrew like matos lelo tayas. Those are drones, which means an airplane without
Unmanned.
a pilot. Unmanned, yeah.
But maybe they chose this word also because Nesher, if it's not an eagle, if it's this type of vulture, it probably flies high and long distances and
Maybe also the gliding motion.
right,
Like it's
as
like,
opposed to a
the
bird
glides,
that
it's not
maybe,
like flapping.
Some birds
Yeah.
just hop, they fly, but not big distances.
Yeah, this is a high flyer, exactly. And they do, the vultures, they fly, like, they actually eat carcasses. Like, they're predators, but they don't, like, hunt animals. They find carcasses of animals that already died, and then they eat them. And they prey on them, yeah. So they prey on, like, hyenas are the same way. They prey on animals that are already dead. And it's important to have them in an ecosystem, because it gets rid of all, the garbage, basically. So anyway, now let's get to the home itself. So I'll start from the bottom up. And a basement is called a martef. And this word comes from Masachet Pesachim, where it's talking in the very first Mishnah, very beginning of Pesachim. What's the beginning, the first thing about Pesach you need to know? Cleaning up for Pesach, right? Getting rid of the Hametz. So we have here the laws of B'dikat Hametz, right? Orla Arba'asar, what came into Hametz, the Oraner. On the night of the 14th, we check for the Hametz. And the rule is, Kol makom she'en machnisin bo Hametz ein tzarech b'dika. Any place where you don't put Hametz, you don't have to check, right? So if you have a room in your house, we never bring food in there. You don't have to check it. And so an example, so a cellar, so in this context, it's like somewhere where you'd store barrels of wine. Like a wine cellar, exactly. So if you have like rows and rows of barrels of wine, you don't have to move all the barrels and check behind them. All right, check the first like 2 rows, because there, all right, you might have been walking around with food, with hametz. So there, you check there, but you don't have to check all the way in the back. So from this little halacha about the wine cellar comes the modern Hebrew word for a cellar or a basement, which is a martef. Any questions to this point?
I just have a question about chametz. Why do you have to check the first 2? Because if there's barrels back there, sooner or later you're getting the wine from them.
I guess what's going on, and I learned this together, but I don't remember all the conclusions. And there's a mahloket here with Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. How are 2, just on the bottom, or if you have them stacked up, does that count as a row? But the idea is that the ones in the back, you haven't been there in a while. Like when you get to them, then yes, okay. Depend, wherever it was, which row you got up to by Pesach. Yeah, exactly. But it's a good question. I guess it assumes a certain, way of doing things. Like when did you fill up your cellar? When did you whatever? Okay, next is an asla. In case you ever knew, you really need the bathroom. But in the bathroom, the toilet clog, so that's an asla. And this comes from Masachet Kelim, another spot for rare words that have been revived into modern Hebrew. And this Masachet Kelim is the longest Masachet in all of the 6 Sedarim of Mishnah, and perhaps one of the most difficult. There's no Gemara on it, but in there, the whole Masachet is about purity and impurity. Different vessels, kelim are vessels. So one thing that's mentioned there is a toilet. So it explains what kind of impurity, how the toilet could become impure. The Masachet goes through everything, everything that you come into contact with, and I included the commentary of Rabbeinu Obadiah Bar Tanura, who explains exactly what this asla is. Beit Moshab Shel Barzel Mechusa Or. I guess in his time, this is how toilets were made. So it's a place to sit, made of iron, but covered with leather. V'yoshvim alav beit hakiseh. And that's where you sit in the bathroom.
Sounds comfortable.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
So you mentioned Shilutim. I noticed it's not on here. When I went to school, we called the bathroom Beit Shimush.
Interesting.
When did they switch over?
All right, so it's a great question, because here you see, for example, Rabbeinu Obadiah Bar Tanura calls it the Beit HaKiseh. So that's what, in his day, it was, the Hebrew term was for it. Beit Shimush, so Shimush is like, I guess like a service, the service room. It's a little cleaner, I don't know. Sherutim also just means like the services. But what I hear mostly in Israel is Shilutim.
Me too. But I was just wondering, I never heard of Shilutim until I went to Israel.
Interesting. So maybe that was another name suggested for it, but Shilutim is the one that caught on.
Or just like a modern day name of something.
Yeah, I don't know. And we'll get to later on the last source an interesting story about like a battle for a word. There was a certain thing that a few different words were suggested for it until one finally won, and get it, it's tomato, but we'll get up to it at the end. If you're wondering why there's a picture of a tomato, it's hard to tell what it is in black and white. Another thing I want to add about this, just we have the word moshav, beit moshav, like a thing that you sit on. So moshav is a seat. That's how you would call it in modern Hebrew. So if you're on an airplane, for example, like which seat am I sitting in? So you'd call it moshav. A kiseh is a chair, but then a seat is moshav because lashevet is to sit.
A settlement, no?
A yishuv.
Oh, you should.
But that's interesting because there's lashevet and leshev. Like to settle and to sit are very related. And when we say leshev basukah, is it to settle and dwell in the sukkah or just to sit in the sukkah? When we say lashevet, that's a whole other tangent. So since we're talking about this tum'ah and masachet kelim, I just included another interesting word, midras. Maybe some of us are familiar with this type of tum'ah called tumat midras. Just certain types of impure people, like in the Torah we have a zab and a zabah. Anything that they step on or stand on becomes tameh, even if there's a few different layers of it. That's tumat midras. So in modern Hebrew, this concept of midras, something that you step on, came the word for insoles. Like you put insoles in your feet, like medical insoles, Dr. Scholl's, whatever, those are midrasim. And it comes from lidros. Lidros is like trample on something. I don't know if we mentioned it when we talked about cars, but if you run someone over with your car, it's also called lidros. So that's running over, trampling on something, or insoles is a midras, something that you always step on, right? Every step you take. Okay, now moving to the kitchen. Kirayim is a stove, and this comes from Masechet Shabbat. Masechet Shabbat discusses different types of ovens, different types of cooking implements. The three that are mentioned specifically, Neital, good to see you, take a seat, are Tanur, Kirayim, and a Kupah. And they go from level of more and to less hot, and the laws that are discussed there are which ones you're allowed to leave on from before Shabbat, and if there's a word that you might come to stoke the flames. But anyway, it's mentioned there, Kirayim, and I found this picture. I found it on the internet, but I think it comes from like the drawings of Harambam's commentary to Mishnayot, what a Kirayim looked like in the old days, the times of the Mishnah. And it's basically this box, fireproof box, and you light like a little fire under there, but the box had two holes on top. And that's why Kirayim has the implication of two. And then you just like stick a pot inside the hole, and the fire is underneath. I guess it had a wide brim, so you sit it on there, and that's how they cooked. And so now a stove sort of resembles that, because you have like a spot for each pot. So that's why a stove is called kirayim, even though now most modern stoves have even more than two spots, but it's still called kirayim, which is the ancient oven cooking thing that had two holes. And by the way, I think that the word kirayim comes from the root lakur, which is to dig. Like, for example, they're digging the tunnels for the trains. It's called lakur at minharot, and so it's like you have two spots that are dug out of the box to put the stove in. But anyway, that's kirayim.
Wall is a kir, that's with a kuf?
That's with a kuf. So I don't think it's related to that. A tanur is a different type of oven, where you actually put the food inside the box or inside the container where the fire is. That's an oven in a modern Hebrew. But that's more well known, so I include it.
What's the word for burner?
Each burner on I think you just call it kira, but I'm not sure.
I would think.
Or which
that's what I'm
esh
thinking.
you would say.
Kirayim, more than one of something is ayin.
Right.
So
The ayim, yeah, like einayim, uznaim are pairs. And that's what the original kirayim was, a pair of holes. Now it's more. Mm-hmm. And the item you see in the next picture, I think it's called a stove rack. Unless someone else knows of another word for it.
Right.
Yeah, those racks that go on top of the stove. Like that's what the pot actually sits on.
Maybe a grate.
Yeah.
A grill.
The grill?
No, not a grill.
That
Grill is
it's
like
usually
a
black
but a grill.
and it has like this like
Yeah.
star shape, that thing that and it always gets dirty under there, and you like clean it, whatever. So in Hebrew there's a word for it that comes from Tanakh. It's called the mashpet, because we have this story about Elisha, the prophet, who one time was cooking for all the students of the Nevi'im. Elisha shava Gilgala v'hara'a ba'aretz u'bnei Nevi'im yoshivim lefanav v'yomer lena'aro shefot hasir hagdola. Set up the big pot. Until today, seer is a big pot. But what is the verb shefot? It means like set it up on the. It comes from safa, I think. Like set it up on the lip of the fire or whatever it is. So from that word, they say, when you set up a pot on something, that's lishpot with a taf at the end. So therefore, we're going to call this stove rack a mashpet, because what used to be lishpot et tasir. So from this story was born a word mashpet. Okay, next one.
Sfat hayam is the edge of the sea.
Yeah.
Same word.
So that's with a sin, not a sheen. Shifat, clearly with a sheen. I suspect that's related.
Yes, it's like the lip of the ocean, so to speak.
Exactly. Right. Now that's definitely related to lips, the sfat hayam. But this shifat or mashpet, the question is if that's related to lip also, even though it's a sheen, not a sin. And I don't know. And really the way that the commentators understand this word is just based on context. Like shafot hasir, like set up the pot and start cooking. Like just from context that means to set up a pot.
What does the Gilgal refer to?
Oh, it's the name of a place. He came back to Gilgal.
Oh.
Any more questions on that? Next is a switch. And this is a fun word. And this pasuk we actually mentioned a few weeks ago because it has the modern Hebrew word for brake, like when you're braking in a car. Al tiyu kesus kefered en havin ben metech varesen idol uvlom bal kerob elecha. Don't be like this pasuk in Tehillim tells us. Oh, whoops! I made a mistake here on the source. It's not from Sefer, it's from Tehillim. This pasuk in Tehillim tells us, don't be like a horse or a mule that they don't understand. You have to use the rein, you have to use the bit to like guide them and stop them. So meteg is a bit that a horse would use, right? And the resen is the reins. It goes together, like the whole contraption, the reins with the bit. And what does a bit look like? It's kind of like a stick that goes in the horse's mouth. All right, so in modern Hebrew, that is the word for a switch, like an electrical switch, like a light switch, as they'll call it meteg. And why? Because it's just a stick that you move to 2 different positions. Thinking not of a light switch on the wall, but rather a switch in an electrical circuit is basically you have like wiring, and then it opens or closes. Like on a electrical schematic, it's just a stick that moves to open or close position, and that's a meteg.
Also, like the role of an animal is pretty binary. So you're either getting him to rake the field or not.
Yeah.
On off.
Perhaps. So that's a meteg. And also another usage of this word meteg, and this isn't necessarily modern, but like we have something called the ma'amid. You know what a ma'amid is? If you're reading from this, the Chumash or even a Sidur, it's just a vertical line that tells you to stress that syllable, right? Ma'amid tells you to stand, la'amod, like stay on that syllable for a little longer. So I'm not sure how it became called that. It could be that it's because the shape, it's just a stick, just like the bit of the horse is like a stick, or it's a stick, right? That's the shape of it. Or maybe it's also, what do you use the bit for? To slow the horse down. And that's what the ma'amid or the meteg is used for, that vertical line. It tells you to slow down on that syllable.
Is it ma'amid on the men?
No, I'm saying ma'amid has another name. It's also called meteg.
Meaning the actual
ma'amid, yeah. We know it as, like in our community, it's always called the ma'amid.
Oh,
but other communities call it a meteg.
Right.
So meteg is used to slow something down. So the switch.
In reading. Either that could be where it comes from, or maybe it's a double entendre also because it's shaped like a meteg. like the bit of the horse, because it's a vertical line. And there's also a type of bacteria that's known in modern Hebrew as a metek, because it's like this bacteria that's shaped like a stick.
Oh.
So things that I discovered when I was preparing for the class. This word metek. Leblom, we said, is to break in modern Hebrew, just like you're slowing down the horse. And the resten, which is the reins of the horse. Don't think, I don't need that word because I don't do horseback riding that much, because you also say, just like in conversation, we got to rein this in, got to rein them in. This, coronavirus is out of control, got to rein it in. So you have the verb, the rasen, to rein something in. That comes from this pasuk. Take these words, bring them to life, and turn them into verbs. All right. More things you might find in your house. Eden, with an aleph. So this has a few different meanings, but the one I'm thinking of in the house is a sill, like a windowsill. Eden halon. Halon window, right? And it comes from, and I was glad when I heard this, because it's this weird word that comes from the Mishkan, Eden, the Torah. And I'm happy that it was there's a use for this word in day-to-day language. So I have a couple of pictures on the side. The bottom three pictures all have to do with this word Eden. I don't know if you can see them, but they basically help illustrate this pasuk, which talks about the Adanim. The holy sills, the holy Edens. So what is Eden? The Mishkan was a structure made of these beams that locked into each other. Right? It wasn't like one big wall. The wall was just made of beams that locked into each other, so that it would be easy to transport. And then each beam had a base. You can see in that middle picture that shows the beams on their side, and this rectangle thing that the sockets that it fit into. So that's what the Eden is. That socket on the bottom, metal socket, what a wooden beam fit into. And then all the beams fit into each other. So in modern Hebrew, you look at this and say, all right, it's sort of like a pedestal. So a pedestal is an Eden. Or a base for something. Also, you have on a railroad, the railroad ties. Like a railroad, you have the two rails, and they sit on these lines that intersect them, right? Those, they're either made of wood or sometimes they're made of concrete. The things that hold up the rails. The things that hold up the rails are called adanim, or a sill, because the sockets actually they protrude out a little bit from under the beams, just like a windowsill protrudes out from the house.
Why pedestal?
Because the beams sit in this socket, so it's kind of like the footstool, the base. They lift up the beam. And another interesting pasuk with Eden, comes up in the Mishkan, the silver, base items, but also in Shir Hashirim. And these are two things that I think in every class always come up: the Mishkan or the Beit HaMikdash, and Shir Hashirim always comes up. And this is describing a male body, or probably a male body. That's what I always assumed. But it is, because Shokav is his thighs, Amudei Shesh, are like pillars of marble. Musadim al adnei faz. His legs or his thighs are like pillars of marble that are set into a foundation of golden pedestals. Adnei faz. Mareu kalvanon b'chol karazim. And he looks like Lebanon, strong as the cedars. So something to think about when you read Shir Hashirim, Adnei faz are these his feet are like gold that hold up marble legs. Any questions on that? All right, getting into the kitchen. We have our dishwasher is mediach kelim. And mediach just means to wash something or to wipe something clean, rinse something in the Gemara. So that's where it comes from, the thing that rinses items.
There's another word for wash, no?
L'rhath. But l'rhath. 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 Yeah. So that'd be used for washing the body, for bathing.
We have another word. Lavash?
L'chabes, maybe. The chabes is to launder clothing. The
That's-
chotz is to rinse or wash the body,
Kvisa is a
to bathe
washing
the body.
machine.
What?
The washing machine's a kvisa.
Mechorat kvisa, yeah. Hey, welcome Milan. Feel free to take a sheet. But mediach kelim is your dishwasher, because kelim are dishes, right? Like utensils. If you want to talk about your kitchen utensils, it's kelim. And I brought this source here because it will lead us to another word. This source is talking about kashrut, meat and dairy, right? Basar roteach, shenafal letoch halav roteach. If you had meat that was boiling hot, it fell into milk that was boiling hot. V'chen sonen shenafal letoch ham, or if it was cold and it fell into something hot, then it's asur. But ham letoch sonen, sonen letoch sonen mediach. What if it was hot and it fell into cold, or cold it fell into cold? Then you just rinse it off. If the substrate that the other thing fell on, and it was whether it was meat that fell into milk or milk that fell into milk or fell into meat, if what it fell into was cold, then you could just rinse it off. I assume we're talking about solids here. Now I'm talking about liquids. That's a different story. But it's mediah to rinse. But it's interesting. This sonen means cold. That's clear from the context. We're talking about hot and cold, right? With the meat and the milk. Because what would you, if you wanted to describe something as cold, what word would you use? Kar. Kar is cold. But in Lashon Hachamim, in the Mishnah, they usually use this word, sonen. So this word also made its way into modern Hebrew usage, because if you have a cold, right, you have a runny nose, then you would say, ani mitzunan. From this word, sonen.
That's a common, mitzunan is a common word?
Yeah. I have a cold, ani mitzunan.
No one knows
I'm
that
cold.
it comes from this Aramaic root, right?
We do.
Right, but so is it kind of just like an unintuitive word to an Israeli?
I guess so, but like they might not realize that, in other languages it's the same word. They might be like, this is a word when you have, maybe they don't know it means cold. Maybe they just think it means like runny nose. And I don't know.
Teach to me, like, oh wow, it's a legit word. An Israeli was teaching it to me. I would have no way of knowing if it was slang or not.
Right. But here you go. It comes. And by the way, I don't know if this is Aramaic. I think it's just Mishnaic Hebrew. Like a lot of times, we had some examples in the past. They're both Hebrew. The Torah says it one way, but the Mishnah says a different way. Like the sun is Shemesh, right? Because it's modern Hebrew, that's what we say. But in the Mishnah, it's always Hama, right? Like Shkiyat Hama. Or the moon. Why do we say Birkat Lebana, not Birkat Yareach? Because in the Mishnah, it's known as Lebana. So here, Sonen is Kar. So it survived in modern Hebrew as when you have a cold. Okay, next word is related to the dishwasher. Could you ever open the dishwasher by accident in the middle of a cycle?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you have all these like vapors coming out, right? The steam. So vapor is called ed, or vapors is idim. Aleph, dalet. And it's not a very common word in the Torah, but we have it in Parashat Bereshit at the very beginning. This is right after the 6 days of creation, and then Shabbat. Then we have like a new story, right, where it says, and there's nothing yet growing in the world, right, because there had not fallen rain yet. And then it says, "Ve'ed ya'alem min ha'aretz v'yishka et kol pnei adama." But this cloud would come up from the ground, and that would water the ground. So usually in the Torah, a cloud is what? Anan. But here you have ed. So modern Hebrew, we have this extra word that seemingly means the same thing. Perfect, because we have some other words that the Torah doesn't give us. Vapor. And this, it kind of fits. It's not really, clouds don't just rise from the ground. Like, okay, water vapor could, like if there was moisture on the ground.
Does it also mean steam, or is the separate word for steam it's the same?
That's a good question. I'm not sure how you'd say steam, but steam is water vapor. So, like I think you would say ed
It's
or
hot
edim.
water vapor.
Usually, yeah, but usually in modern Hebrew, usually it's like in plural vapors, like edim. But you could also to evaporate. So it's a verb also. Like mitadeh is like when something is evaporated.
Right.
Or if someone
Maybe
just like
steam is ed kham. Hot vapor.
Or advice.
maybe like I don't know if there's a special word for steam. It's just basically what
I
we're
mean, it's not.
dancing
Is
around.
that cold vapor? Not really.
Vapor's always
What? Is it?
It's always
Well,
hot.
water can evaporate,
hotter than.
Water evaporates, that's not hot.
It's not vapor.
and you have other.
Vaporizers, you can have a cold vaporizer.
And how do you order coffee with steamed milk?
You usually say with boiling milk, not steamed milk. Café mahalav roteah. So I think they dance around it because there's not really a word.
Well, they say halaf.
Like steam is a very specialized word. It's like just water vapor, like not vapors in general. So like I don't know that every language needs a word for it. Or maybe there's a word that I don't know. It doesn't come up in day-to-day life. And like I said, like with steamed milk, they say halab roteah, boiled milk.
That's steamed.
It's an interesting thing. I don't know.
But in English, steam doesn't refer only to water.
Doesn't?
You just said steamed vegetables.
Well, what? No, steamed vegetables is because you cook them with steam.
Steamed water.
No, it's
I guess so, yeah.
Not just
Not
water.
just milk.
Right.
It's like vapor can be used for different.
I would just say a steam engine.
Steam engine, but it's
That's probably
Well, we did that last time with the train. It's called qatar.
over the hot cold.
Because ketoret is, the plumes of the smoke. It's all right, something interesting to look into. But yeah, like I said, it's also a verb. Like mitadeh is evaporate, or sometimes people use it like when someone disappears, like he just evaporate, like he just evaporated into thin air. Oh, he dada. So alf daled is
Is
ed.
vapor always water? You can have vapors from other.
Right, it's not always water. No, that's why water vapor. They tell you that the vapor is specifically water.
How do now people vape, right? Which is a new word that didn't exist
Ah.
2 years ago. How do they say vape in Israel?
I don't know, but they probably use this word, like idui maybe.
Yeah.
That's something interesting to.
Yeah.
What? They might just say vape. Yeah,
That sounds vaping.
lots of vaping. I hope not, but
Probably.
I don't know. They might use like idui, or
Because there's always new words coming up.
exactly.
How they,
And so what happens usually, like they just borrow the foreign word for it, but sometimes they use like, okay, there's a Hebrew word for this concept already. They'll just make it fit. But moving on, we had the water vapor and the steaming hot water. So now on the other side of the spectrum is the cold, which we already mentioned, but a freezer. Freezer. So first of all, what's a refrigerator? Which I didn't include here. Makarer, right? Because it makes things cold. Makpi freezes things. And that freezing is what? Turning liquid into a solid. That's what the freezer. I mean, we use the freezer to preserve things, not just as an ice maker. But in the definition, to freeze something is make something liquid, solid, and that's what's happening in this pasuk here from Parashat Bishalach. It should be familiar to us from Az Yashir, after the splitting of the sea. Ubrah hapecha ne'an mumayim, with the wind of your nostrils, God. The water stood up in a pile, in a heap. Yitzibu kamo ned nozilim. They stood up like a heap. The nozilim, like the things that were liquid, and nozel is a liquid until today. Chafa'u tehomot belev yam. The depths froze, became solid in the heart of the sea. So, chafa'u tehomot, they froze. The depths froze, right? It's formed like a solid wall in the splitting of the sea. Exactly. So that's why lahakpi is to freeze something, and that's a makpi. In your kitchen freezer is makpi.
So this word in this pasuk doesn't indicate temperature. It just indicates going from something liquid to something standing still.
Exactly. And
Right.
so if something is congealing,
Right.
it's also nikpa. And we're actually going to get to that in the next source. So thanks for pointing that out, David. because the next source is also something that you use for the cold, which is your air conditioner, and that's called a mazgan. Okay, and we might be familiar with the term Mezzagavir, right? What's Mezzagavir? The weather. But why does it mean weather? What is a Mezzagavir? So, and I want to look at the second source here first before we get to the Shir Shirim, which is fun, but will be easier to understand once we explain what Mezeg is, Mezzagavir. So Mezzagavir is like the mixture of the weather. And we're going to read here about limzog kos, like pouring a cup of wine, or pouring a cup of any liquid. So when you pour a cup of wine, in ancient times, you had the wine was very strong, so you always added water. So pouring a cup of wine, you were mixing the wine with water. So that's why the mzog, in modern Hebrew, we use it to pour a cup, but the original meaning is mixing the wine with the water. So, for example, here in Masechet Sukkah, Kol Shivat Yamim Adam Oseh Sukkato Keba Ubeito Arai. All 7 days of Sukkot, they were in Israel, so there's not 8 days. Your Sukkah is your main place, not in the house is your temporary place. Yardug Shamim. Okay, so what if it starts raining? Me'matay mutar lefanot. When can you leave the Sukkah if it's raining? Mishet tisrah ha-mikpah. When this dish called mikpah becomes masriah, becomes like ruined. So mikpah is this certain congealed dish. And I guess if like a water falls into it, it ruins it because then it's like not solid anymore, it becomes soggy. Yeah. So here you see mikpah is this congealed dish.
Like a cha. It's like a chicken fat jello.
Yeah. That's what I imagine too, something like that.
Congealed.
It doesn't sound that appetizing.
Yeah. Grandmother once made it.
But if that, I guess you have to be someone who normally would eat it, but knows that when it goes bad. So mishet tisraha mikpah.
It's like a mousse.
Yeah, I guess.
Jello.
Like a jello. I think the jello, like a chicken fat jello.
Like a chicken organ jello mousse.
So exactly. Tisrah. When something is nisrah or masriah, means it's like stinky, smelly. That's also a very useful word to know. Like something smells fishy, something stinks. You say it's mashu masriah. Or just like if it's literally like a bad smell, masriah is still used.
So what is the root of that word masriah? Bad rayah is a smell. So
maybe it has to do with rayah. I don't know. But masriah is bad smell. Even though here it's like not necessarily the smell, just like the dish is ruined. And so why did we get into this story anyway? It was because we had to talk about mixing wine and pouring wine. Mashlu mashal lema davar domeh. So when it rains in your sukkah, what is it like? Le'aybet sheba limzog kos l'rabbo v'shafach lo chiton al panav. It's like a servant comes to serve his master to pour him a cup, and that's limzog, to pour a cup. V'shafach lo chiton al panav, and he took the pitcher of wine or whatever it was. The master, he came to serve him, and he just grabbed the pitcher and splashed in his face, like they do in the movies, right? Right in your face. We made the sukkah and everything, and God is sending us rain. It's just like throwing in our face. I know it happens, almost every year, but if it doesn't happen too much, I think we can.
Doesn't happen.
Take it. What?
Doesn't happen in Israel much.
It does sometimes. But yeah, of course, less than here,
about
obviously.
The thing we went on with happened on Sukkot.
It depends if it's early that year or late that year.
They're trying to give like a shiur of time, right? In this situation, but it's like they're trying to give the shiur of time in the exact mashal of what the situation reflects.
Right.
Is that what's happening?
I don't know. Like this mashal is not telling you anything about the halacha. It's just giving you like an emotional kind of like way to process this.
Right, this is right? So it's like how much time? It's a question of like minutes.
Right. So when we're talking about the congealed dish getting ruined, that was telling you, okay, how much rain, enough rain to ruin it.
Right.
But then it goes into, and when it does rain and you have to leave the sukkah, So like, I guess telling you should leave because you know what it's like? It's like God telling you, get out of my face.
Right.
Maybe that's what.
Oh.
Like, don't think, but I love the sukkah so much. I don't care if it ruins everything. I don't care if I'm drenched. I want to be in the sukkah. So I guess they're telling you, no, take a hint. You don't want you in the sukkah.
But the take a hint, though, is saying this is why we have this shear of time, because this is the time to take the hint. Almost.
Maybe.
Something like that. Again, as a riddle.
Or also, like, if it doesn't ruin your food, then you're not suffering. Don't say, like, if there's a tiny drop but it doesn't ruin anything, God's not kicking you out. It's like, oh, hold on, just stay. Okay, it's a little drizzle. But when he's really raining it down and ruins your food, then he knows, okay, God splashed the water, the cup of whatever in my face.
Yeah.
So that's limzog is to pour, to mix, and so mazgan, mezzagavir, mazgan controls the weather, the mezzagavir inside your home by mixing, you need a little more cold, you need a little more hot. And once we already understand this concept of mezeg, we can go back to the pasuk in Shir HaShirim. It's a very cryptic pasuk, but I love Shir HaShirim. Shorerech agan hasahar al yahsar hamazech. Shorech is your navel, like belly button, is like agan. So you can see below I wrote what agan and what sahar is. Agan is a basin. So your belly button is like a basin, hasahar. So what's a sahar? So modern Hebrew, it's a crescent, but it really is another word for the moon.
What?
For the moon.
The moon.
And that's why in modern Hebrew, sahar means crescent, because a crescent is a shape that in nature you find it with the moon. That's what's most commonly associated with. Although in this pasuk it might be referring to a full moon, like saying, "Oh, your belly button is like a basin of the full moon."
So we have two words for belly button. We have this and we have tabur.
So in shorerech is the belly button. That's the word that means belly button. And in modern Hebrew we call it tabur because that's the later Mishnah word for belly button. But in the Tanakh, sharur, or whatever the root of this word is, that means belly button. And so your belly button is like a basin of the moon, al yahsar mazech, and it never is missing this mezeg, the mixture of wine. So unclear why there's a mixture of drink and wine in a belly button and navel. Some of the Mepharshim I read say like it's like describing a woman, so it's like a fertile woman because it's like the belly button provides for or is provided from, I don't know. It's
That's where the
nutrients,
came into.
yeah. Like you got all the nutrients you needed from your belly button.
It indicates the place where the woman holds the egg, maybe, right?
Well, the shorerech, it's talking about the belt, like the navel.
Right. So and it's perfectly being mosaic, meaning it's mixing, not wine, but her
Perhaps.
fluids
Yeah.
constantly with her other fluids.
Right. I thought maybe it's like your navel received all the good stuff when you were like a fetus.
Right. Good, yeah.
Like the elixir of strength and beauty and all that.
Like you got a good gut microbiome.
Exactly. And your stomach or your abdomen is like a pile of wheat kernels that are suga b'shoshanim, means surrounded by roses that have a pleasant fragrance. Right? Suga is like siag, like a siag Torah. It's surrounded by, fenced in by. And also, you have to turn to Farshim to understand why a pile of wheat, it could be like the shape, like sort of an hourglass shape or something. But anyway, so that's Mezzagavir, mazgan, all that mezeg stuff. And until today, when you pour a cup, you're mozeg. Even though it really means mixing, but we don't do the mixing part of it anymore. We just pour. And the sahar. So agan is basin, like some sort, like a bowl of some sort, and it's used today also, but also as part of the body nowadays. That's a word used for the what's this called? This part of the body called? The hips, but not the bone.
Pelvis?
The pelvis, yeah. So pelvis is an agan. because it holds. It's a basin for vital organs, right? So the pelvis is a basin for vital organs.
Like, do you say torso also for agan?
No.
Right. Specifically the pelvic area.
Yeah. It means pelvis in modern Hebrew.
Right.
Like those are the bones of the pelvis are the agan of the body, the
It
basin
also
of the
is
body.
shaped like a basin.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the agan. But also, like if you're like dancing and you say move your hips, it would be laziz ta'agan. So the hip area, which is called. Hips in English it's plural, but in Hebrew it's singular and it's called agan. And Sahar crescent like comes up in the news a lot, like if like the Muslim equivalent of Magen David Adom or the Red Cross is the Red Crescent. So Sahar HaAdom.
Anything to do with prison? Yeah, so a different word.
I don't know. I think it might. And like originally, prison was like a circle, like a pit. And the Sahar being a crescent is more of a modern innovation because we needed a word for crescent. But I think in Shir Shirim it meant a circle. So it's kind of like changing the meaning of the Sahar was a circle shape because it's a moon shape. But now, like, okay, it's a moon shape, but we're making it the crescent moon because we already have circles in Igul. I think it is related to like a circle, like a pit that you get thrown into in prison, like Yosef was like thrown into jail, prison. Next one, armchair, kursa. So this is a simple one. How they came up with this word for an armchair. We know that a chair is a kiseh. That's a more well-known word. Kursa is just like a fancy chair. That's what an armchair is, right? So it's the Aramaic translation of kiseh. I included this pasuk with a story about a chair. It's Eliah Kohen. He's sitting on his chair and like he hears bad news that the Ark of the Covenant was taken and captive in battle, and then he falls backwards off of his chair. So I picked that. There's dozens of course, verses in the Tanakh that have to do with chairs, but we have the Aramaic translation, Targum Yonatan, that I bolded. He fell from off his kursa. I don't think he was sitting in an armchair. That's not the point. That's the Aramaic translation for chair. So modern Hebrew, they used it for armchair. And I don't know if anyone's ever seen this Winnie the Pooh meme before, but it's like the kind of meme that like the idea expresses is like a fan, like the top is like a simple man's way of saying something, and the bottom where Winnie the Pooh's wearing the tuxedo is like a upscale high class way of saying it. So they turned kursa into like, oh, it's a fancy kiseh, not just like, even though it really just means the same thing. So I thought that was cute. Okay, next is matate, which is a broom. And this only appears one place in Tanakh, but of course, our friends, the renewers of the language of Hebrew, they found it. And this really is not necessarily a new word, but sort of taking a rare word and bringing it into popular usage. And this is talking about like destruction. In the book of Shayahu, I'll make it samtia lemoresh kipod v'agmei mayim v'te'atiha b'matate hashmed ne'um Adonai Tzvaot. I'll sweep up the place with a broom. That's the kind of destruction, just like sweep everything away. But what if you need a little more than just a broom? You need a vacuum cleaner. Shoav abak. So the shoab is to draw water, right? Like pump water. So yeah, in the Torah it means to draw water, but in modern Hebrew it means to pump, because drawing water is essentially pumping it out of the ground. So like a water pumping station would be like tahanat shi'ub mayim, and then the vacuum cleaner sort of pumps or sucks up all of the dust.
I mean, isn't shoav to pull in as opposed to push out?
Oh yeah, vacuum cleaner pulls in. Right, and drawing water is pulling the water in from the
well.
well.
How do you say vacuum in a scientific context?
Ah, that's a great question, and the answer is vacuum. Yeah,
They thought long and hard for that one.
exactly. So at least they didn't use that menakeh vacuum.
Oh,
So for the vacuum cleaner device, they came with an authentically Hebrew word, but in the scientific context, the vacuum is vacuum.
Avak is dust.
Yep.
Avak
There's
is
another
dust.
word for dust.
Afar.
Afar.
Right. So afar is more like dirt kind of connotation, where avak is dust. And I think that the source for that is in the first, why avak is dust specifically comes from the first source. Did you have a question, Eli?
No.
All right. What's this source? The first pasuk here. Anyone remember this story? Vayivater Yaakov levado, vayi'abek ish imo ad alot hashachar.
Wrestled with him.
Yes, Yaakov, he left on the other side of the river, and all night he wrestled with a mysterious man who was really an angel. Or, that's the way I usually understand it. So, exactly, Vayi'abek is wrestling, because what is wrestling? You're wrestling and you kick up dirt. Dust, rather. Right? You're wrestling with each other in the dust, and if you plume of dust coming up because you're wrestling with each other. And that's where the word vayavek comes from, because in the next pasuk you see that when avak is not used as a verb but rather as a noun. That's when Moshe and Aaron take ashes and they throw it into the air, and then the ashes falls as dust. Yiten Adonai mitar atzecha. Oh no, that was a different pasuk. I chose not to use that one, where the dust came down for the boils. This is different. This is in the curses, the end of the Torah that we're going to read in a few weeks. Yitan Adonai mitar tzecha avak ve'afar min hashamayim yared alecha ad hishamedach. Instead of rain falling down from the sky, if you don't listen to the Torah, then dust and dirt. So we'll come down from this
is ash.
Efer with an aleph is ash, afar is dirt, and avak is dust.
Right.
That's how I would translate the three.
Also, I wanted to say, we also use the word dirty in English to refer to fighting. Like, you want to get down and dirty, like it's fighting.
Right, interesting.
Dirt, like vayavek.
Right, getting the. It could be that avak here is dirt. Like, who said it dust? But the whole point is, with the vacuum cleaner, you're cleaning up, you're trying to suck up everything.
Right.
Yeah, but typically it's dust.
Right.
And I think that, you have to say avak is dust because there are other places in the Torah you have this concept of avekat rochel, the powder of the spice merchants. Right. So spices are powder.
Right.
And
it's not dirt.
Exactly. And in modern Hebrew, avka is powder.
Avka?
Yeah. You just add a hey, avak is dust, but avka is powder. So any type of powder is avka.
They say baby powder.
Coffee. I think.
Latino?
Yeah.
Latino?
I think so. Or it might just be called talcum, because it's talcum powder. I don't think they call it. Why does it have to be called baby powder? It's just talcum powder. I think that's what they call it. So that's the vacuum cleaner, shoev avak, and then the last source has the word shoev. Right, the first two sources were about the word avak, and the last source in Sefer Devarim is the word shoev, because this is the beginning of Parashat Nitzavim. Atem Nitzavim hayom kullechem lifnei Adonai Elohechem rashechem shibtechem tzedechem shedorah Hagol Yisrael. Everyone's standing here, right? The elders, the young, the old, the women, the men, even the hoteb aisecha ad shoeb meimecha, even those who cut the trees and those who draw the water, right? I guess the lowest of society that do the menial labor. So shoeb meimecha, those that draw the water, and the other thing, hoteb aisecha, those that cut the trees, chop down the trees, brings us to the next word. So lahtob aisim means to chop down trees, but elsewhere in Tanakh, lahtob, and also I screwed up this source. It's really from Sefer Tehillim. It means to chisel, like chiseling something in stone is also lahtob. So I'm not talking about wood, but I'm about stone, and that's this pasuk from Tehillim. Asher banenu kinti'im mechudalim b'nu'rehem. Our sons are like young, like trees, they grow so nicely. And our daughters, benotenu chizaviot mechutabot tabnit echal. Our daughters are like corners that are chiseled in the image of the hechal, of a holy hall. So what's going on in this pasuk? So the beginning is easier to understand. Like we're saying, our sons are like trees that grow very nicely, but our daughters. So in the corners, the zaviyot of a building, you'd have like pillars, right? And so the pillars, often like in a very beautiful building, would be chiseled. Like you have like a marble column that's chiseled with designs. So that's benotenu chazaviyot v'chudavot tabnitechal. So it's like a sign of beauty that they're chiseled with designs. And in modern Hebrew, so you'd have this word lahtov again would be used for chiseling, but it's mostly used for like bodybuilding, right? Like chiseled abs, chiseled body. So like it's common to see after Sukkot like advertisements for a gym. Like seeing like a bus stop, like oh, there's no more excuses. The holidays are over. Come to the gym and get chiseled. Bo lithateb, get chiseled. So mehutab is chiseled. So interesting to look back at this pasuk now. It's like, oh, our daughters are very chiseled, very strong. It's an interesting look back at that. So it's chiseled. And now, it's interesting trivia. This is a very rare instance that usually lahtob in the Torah means to cut down trees, not chiseling stone. If you're chiseling stone, what does the Torah usually say? And we'll realize why they don't use that word anymore. Pesol lecha shnei luchot avanim karishonim, right? Pesol lecha. God tells Moshe to chisel the luchot. So just to chisel stone is lifsol. And that's where pesel comes from. Pesel is an idol statue that you chisel. But it's not used because later on, lifsol came to mean something else, like pasul. This is now the word in the Mishnah has a different meaning. It means like something is invalid, right? Pasul. Pasul le'idut.
The fact that it came from Hathaway?
Yeah, probably. That's
I don't know.
valid.
I don't know if that's where it comes from.
Invalid? Pasul means
Maybe.
So yeah,
Sounds
Pesel's
like
invalid.
they're
False.
trying to
False
invalidate the
gods.
word. Because
Pesel.
why should you have such a normal word? You're such a very scary topic.
Maybe.
But you're trying to cancel this word so that.
So yeah, and pasul means invalid.
Pretty cool.
All right, pasul le'idut. That's like the way the word is used in the Mishnah, but in modern Hebrew it's used the same thing. If you want to validate something, lifsol, pasul.
It's
So
kind of like isur ba'mot, like something that used to be normal. Once
Right.
it came, that's what I was like, we don't do this anymore. Like,
Right.
We don't even use the word.
exactly,
Yeah,
it's definitely just like they canceled it.
exactly.
And so that's why in modern Hebrew you can't use like if you're talking about a statue you'd say pesel, but if you were talking about chiseled body you wouldn't say guf pasul because that just sounds like invalid, right? So because the word came to mean something else, so we had to find this niche meaning of hitub for chiseling.
I'm thinking though, it probably is more, I mean, they didn't use it, but it probably goes.
What?
Because when you're talking about a chiseled body, like, is it real, like, should you be so interested in that, like, in other words, it's...
Right, it's very physical, very,
Right.
yeah.
So it kind of goes with the theme of Pasul.
Perhaps.
Or more like Pesel.
Pesel, yeah.
Like an idol is something, not spiritual.
Right, so
Right,
the
I just thought
chiseled
you're just-
body is the same.
Right, so it's sort of like, worship of the body, of the
Right,
physical.
worship of the right. So
Right,
that's
just like
what
you
I'm saying,
chisel your
probably-
idols, okay, so you're chiseling your own body too. It's the same thing.
Which I'm saying that it probably would have fit well had they used it, is what I'm saying, but they didn't.
Right. Yeah, also like there's being fit, being in shape, being strong, but chiseling already has like a connotation that it's just about the appearance.
It's like worshiping
not about
your body.
I need to be strong.
It's like worshiping
Right.
your body.
I mean, you could have the same outcome, but it's a question of what is your motive and what
Right.
you're focused on.
Right.
So I included two more words that we get from these two pairs of psukim here. This is in a paragraph in Tehillim that starts with David. We read it on the after alphabeta. David Baruch Adonai Suri Hamdabed Yadad Akrab. So the end. This is that part. Asher Banenu Ki'inti'im Mehudalim. Okay, so we have the parts about the sons and the daughters and the chiseled, and then the next pasuk talks about like it's describing all the beracha when you listen, when you do, when things are good. Mezzavenu Medaim. So that's another Mezzavenu is like I said before the corners, but modern Hebrew zavit or zaviyot is an angle because a corner is a pinah. Modern Hebrew, right? And that's the usual word for a corner.
Karen Zavit is not a corner?
So exactly. So that's like in Mishnaic Hebrew, in the Gemara, in Mishnah, you find that Keren Zavit is a corner. But in modern Hebrew, you use the biblical word pinah for a corner. But if you're talking about an angle, which is the same thing basically, just that has the connotation, okay, this could be acute, obtuse, right angle. So an angle is Zavit. Like, oh, I need the right angle, I need the right Zavit. And it comes from here. And by the way, why is pinah a corner? Because it's like lifnot. You could turn either way.
Because four sides will give you four corners. No? They make a square.
Yeah, but same thing.
Turn.
Like panim. What is panim? You turn, like you have two sides of your face. You turn the face. Vayifen kol vacho, pinah. Anyway, that's all related. That's neither here nor there. So zavit is an angle, and tifuka is output. Comes from the next pasuk. Mizavenu meleim mifikin mizan alzan. Our corners are full, and they output. So what is these corners talking about? It's talking about like you have a warehouse where you keep the grain, the food. So our granaries are so full that even the corners are full. Usually the middle is full, and like you have a pile, and the corners are a little less so. But here, even the corners are full. Mizavenu meleim mifikin mizan alzan, and we produce. From each time, from time to time. Zan is from mazon. From each, season that the produce, the food is usually produced. Not just the time when we usually have a yield of crop, but even in between them, we're producing. Sonenu ma'alifot merubabot b'chutzotenu. And our sheep are, multiplying by the thousands and 10,000s in our cities. So that's mefikim is tifu. From there comes the word tifuka, your output, how much you're producing. And ma'alifot, elef is 1,000, ravava is 10,000. But nowadays people don't use that; they just say aseret alafim. Except for me, I say when I just want to see 10,000, I say ravava, and people will give me a weird look. But it's like poetic. And any more questions before we get into the last word, which has a fun story? The last word is the tomato that I promised, argbania. Okay, so what's going on with this word? Tomatoes are New World fruit, so they didn't exist in Israel many, in the time, ancient times. So they had to invent a new word they decided to invent a new word instead of just borrowing, from a different language. So this word argbania, there are actually 3 different words proposed around the time of the beginning of the 20th century. The one that Eliezer ben Yehuda proposed was badura, because it comes from the Arabic word for tomato, which is bandura. But that one didn't really stick. The one that stuck is this argbania, which was proposed by another guy. And it comes from two aspects of the tomato: the shape and also the nature of the fruit. In other languages and cultures, it's known as like the love apple tomato. There's like association, like it's like an aphrodisiac or something like that. Tomato is the fruit of love, and in German, for example, the nickname of tomato is Lebensapfel, which means the love apple. So that's one thing about tomato. The other thing about tomato is it has like these creases in it. Okay, that's like characteristic of it. I include this picture to show you what tomatoes used to look like in the past. Tomatoes now have been genetically engineered to look like very round and beautiful, but usually they had like those creases in them, right? Like lobes.
Like a pepper.
Like a pepper, exactly. So from those two aspects, we have argvania. Why? So one word that's being hinted to is in the Tanakh, and these two sources from Sefer Yehezkel, where argva is a verb that means to love or lust after something. Right? God is saying, oh, you were given over to the hand of the Assyrians because you were kept going after them and their gods and loved their culture, so that's why they ended up, destroying you and taking you into captivity. And another pasuk, it talks about shir agabim, love songs. God tells Yehezkel, oh, I know that you're going to tell the people my words, but to them they're just going to listen to it as if it's like a nice song, but not actually do what you say. They like to listen to it for fun, for enjoyment. But anyway, the point is that agabim or la'agov is to love something, so that's you have the love apple, but there's also the shape. So what is the shape? So this passage in Masechet Berachot, it talks about Devarim shebektusha. If you're saying berachot or prayers or kriyat shema, you can't say any prayers if there's someone naked in the room. Like if someone naked, they have to put clothes on. And discusses specifically the status of agabot, which are buttocks, right? Like, is that considered nakedness? Like, it's just if to cover the front, or no, back also. So the shape of the tomato, this guy, his name was Yahya Pines. His name sounds funny in English, but his idea was like, oh, it looks like, the butt cheeks, the buttocks. And also it's known as the fruit of love, which is also agabim, shir agabim. So he invented this word agvania. I mentioned that Eliezer ben Yehuda tried to push a different word, which almost caught on, but then, like by today, nobody uses it.
Which word was that?
Badura, which they copied a word from Arabic. He didn't really invent a new word. But this word was so, how shall I say, risque or like controversial that even Rav Kook, right? Rav Kook, the famous Rav Kook of, he also opposed this word and invented his own word to try to get rid of this agvania. He called it an admonia, from the word adom, like the red, the red thing, the red fruit. But it didn't stick, and much to the chagrin of Rav Kook and Eliezer ben Yehuda, who we all know how big his contributions were. This is the word that stuck.
Rav Kook found it to be obscene, is what you're saying?
Yeah, they were offended by it.
What's the conclusion of the Gemara?
That's Rav Huna's opinion. I don't remember the conclusion. What?
What does that mean?
It means that, like the case that's being discussed of two people that are sharing a bed.
Right.
Back in those days, they were sleeping without clothes on. Exactly. So, like, how you have to cover yourself. You're both under the blanket. So that's how it comes out.
And Rav Huna says it's okay.
Yeah, I don't know that that's what is, the halakha, but yeah, basically that's the discussion there.
Tomatoes go in Israel today?
Yeah.
They are,
It's
right?
interesting,
Yeah, for
Israeli salad, they're not native to Israel.
That's true.
Tomatoes and cucumbers.
Right.
Interesting.
I thought that was a fun one. Any questions about today's class?
Yeah. So to freeze is lehakpi, and so if you have a jar of coconut oil that became liquid, say, oh, let it sit on the counter. That'll be lehakpi.
Well, if it congealed, lakpi. Yeah.
Right. So like I'm saying, go from liquid
How do you
to
defrost
solid
something?
coconut oil.
Yeah.
Like let the coconut oil be lehakpi at the jar.
Yeah.
That's crazy
Lehakpi
because
with
that's
alcohol.
a completely different meaning to freeze, which definitely indicates temperature.
Right. In English, you have freeze and congeal with different connotations, but in Hebrew, it's one word.
So yeah, that's crazy.
And melting is names. That's what it melts.
Frost is, that's how you would say defrost?
I don't know.
Melting and defrosting is different.
Yeah, different. I don't remember. Yeah, look it up. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming, contributing.
Thank you.